Dear colleagues, we really would have liked to start this presentation with some nice pictures of a grand opening of our new library museum, but unfortunately it had to be postponed a few times. This is mainly due to supply bottlenecks for materials needed for the construction of the showcases and shortfalls due to the pandemic situation, and now the opening is scheduled for June 22. With the help of architectural plans, 3D images, and photos of the construction site, I would like to give you a brief overview of the museum. Here, the planning view, here, the situation a couple of days ago. The focus of this talk will of course be on the conservation aspects and the coordination procedures in the development of an operating concept. Following my introduction, my colleague Kali will go into details on the presentation of the different object categories and the challenges in that process. In 2009, the planning of the Library Museum in the State Library Berlin started with an architecture competition. The area for the museum sits right in the center of our historical building. On 850 square meters, there is space for a permanent exhibition and another for temporary exhibitions. The winning design incorporates 80 showcases in the permanent exhibition, all of them varying in size and shape and including 22 drawers. On top, there are 40 showcases in the temporary exhibition space, which can be either used or covered according to individual needs. The long history of the library since its founding in 1661 and its collections is shown through around 380 objects. Here you can see the area of the permanent exhibition with a dark floor, walls and black ceiling. Here the area of the temporary exhibitions where the whole room is kept in white. The space can be altered in size by closing doors in between in order to also show small cabinet exhibitions. On a spiral staircase you can reach the basement with our treasure chamber with the highlights of the exhibition. A complex curation process started in 2010 with a team of up to 12 colleagues, as there are 10 different departments, like the Oriental or Music department, each with their special collections involved and the management. Parallel to this, the first discussions took place on the conservation issues that are linked to the implementation of the permanent exhibition. On the one hand, there are the conditions that play a role for the objects, and on the other hand, conditions that affect the work of the conservators and curators who have to set up the exhibition and keep working on it. The basis for these discussions were the requirements that the State Library itself places on its boroughs for loans outside the library. This includes, as you all know, amongst others, securing the display cases, light control and a stable climate as specified. In addition, there is generally a maximum of a 3-month presentation period set. For manuscripts, this is usually 6 weeks. Sometimes, depending on the sensitivity of the object, either the lighting intensity is reduced or the loan period is shortened. From a conservation point of view, there are actually no reasons to set these standards differently for one's own exhibition. There were some discussions within the library, but for you I do not need to explain the sensitivity of library material towards light and changes in relative humidity. Against the background of these considerations, we decided to operate the permanent exhibition in general according to the conditions we set for our loans. In reality, this means talking about a permanently changing exhibition rather than a permanent exhibition. The resulting consequences for the operation of the museum were huge. First of all, for all the curators, this meant that from the very beginning, for each object in the first display, more exchange objects had to be selected as well, and a gigantic list of over 1,000 objects was created. For us conservators, it means that there will be a change 4 times a year. Doing that with all 380 objects was clearly unrealistic, so in order to reduce the quantity of exchanging objects somewhat in the long run, some, partly difficult decisions had to be made. One was to acquire a second museum copy for certain books, which are important for the history of the library but not particularly valuable, in order to be able to present them permanently in the museum instead of the library copy. In addition, facsimiles have been made for some objects, which will be exchanged for the original after the first display and will then remain permanently in the exhibition. Where applicable, another alternative will be just turning the pages and exchanging the book only after a longer period of time. We do also have quite a few objects which are far less problematic in a permanent exhibition, like this very modern material or this travel toilet box of the composer Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy or the tilt rule from our map department. To be clear, by the time we handed in this talk, we thought that we would be able to give a first practice review on running the exhibition. Right now, the operation is well thought through, but theory, and it will be exciting to see how it will work in practice. I now hand over to my colleague Kali for the implementation of the technical and practical issues.
Hello, I'm going to talk about working together with the architects to design the hanging and mounting systems and book supports. When I began in November 2018, the curation process was underway. The overall design of the museum cases had already been decided on, but the internal measurements had yet to be finalized. The architects had the task of working out which objects could be presented in each display case and how they could be presented. They were also to design the book cradles and other mounting supports. So my first task was to measure the exhibits in the state that they would be displayed, books opened or closed, and to categorize them according to object type, book, 3D object, flat paper, and so on, and then to pass this information on to the architects. I quickly realized that the existing curators' lists of exhibits were not suitable for our requirements. We needed a filterable table with not only information about which department of the library the object belongs to and which theme they were to be shown under, but also information about their condition and any conservation work needed, and, as mentioned above, object type and materials, with space for special considerations for conservation and display. This resulted in a huge Excel table which went through several incarnations as we worked through the options for display and realized that more information needed to be added. At this point, we had no specifications for the mounting systems or information about which objects would be hanging and which lying in the cases. The use of drop-down menus and the filter function were invaluable for me when assessing objects, for arranging my workload, and especially for calculating statistics, how many book supports would be needed, and how many flat objects there were, for example, and later, for calculating the quantities of mounting materials I needed to order. With the measurements and photos of each object, the architects created a plan with diagrams showing the positions of the exhibits and the cases. This was quite a lengthy process, since some of the objects that the curators would have liked to have displayed didn't fit, and then another object had to be found, assessed, and measured. Then I added to my table more columns to indicate whether an object was to be hung, matted, or sits on a book support. For the book supports, we wanted a system that could be reused rather than made for specific books, and so a modular system was developed. This means that we will not have to construct new supports for every new book or every time a new page is displayed, and also less waste will be produced. And so began the process of working together with the architects to find solutions that both look good and function well. Michaela Brandt and Hanka Gerhol's book about book supports for exhibitions provided an excellent starting point for the development of the designs. This design for a folded sheet of 1.2 mm thick steel, coated with the same powder coating used in the museum cases, was proposed with flat and tilted variations. The volume sits on a right and left support, with the spine hanging freely in the gap in the middle, or supported when necessary. The two halves can be moved closer or further apart to accommodate the thickness of the book. To prevent the two halves from sliding apart under the weight of the volume, flat neodymium magnets are taped to the undersides. The two halves can sit on a base sheet of the same coated metal, so that the volume can be fixed in place outside the showcase and transported as one piece. Next came a process of deciding which sizes we would need that would be suitable for the majority of the books. The architects had proposed using the sizes folio, quarto, and octavo, but it became clear on analyzing the sizes of the books that the gap between folio and quarto was too big. Also, the proportions had to be slightly different, as we wanted the covers to protrude slightly over the edges of the book support, so they had to be slightly narrower. For the tilde variation, the sizes had to be different again, as the foot of the book sits on the supporting fold and protrudes only at the top edge. And for these, we need a right and left side. Looking at the ranges of sizes of the books to be exhibited, it was decided that we would have 5 sizes of book support with lengths between 13 to 53 centimeters and 7.5 to 10 centimeter steps. That means that a book will protrude over the support no more than 5 centimeters at top and bottom. More sizes would have been preferable, but the variants are expensive. The height in the middle of the supports for books that are not displayed open to the center also needed to be decided on. Having each size with heights and steps of 1 centimeter would result in too many variants, so it was decided that they would be produced in heights of 2, 4, and 6 centimeters, with 8 and 10 centimeter variants for some of the larger supports. When this step is too great to allow a volume to sit well, a piece of 1 centimeter thick plastisode can be placed on top of the support. A standard opening angle of 120 degrees was decided upon, as most books can comfortably lie open at this angle without putting strain on them. A few supports with an opening angle of 100 degrees will also be produced for a few books that are too tightly bound, and in the drawers where height is critical, some thinner books will be open to 140 degrees. We have ended up with quite a complex system of standard sizes, but I hope that it will not be so complicated to use. When placed in the cases, the book supports, being the same color and material as the case walls, almost disappear, so that the book appears to float. It was quite quickly established that we would develop hanging and mounting systems using magnets, as the inner walls of the museum cases are constructed out of metal. So I began researching the use of magnets in museums. Gwen Spicer's blog, Inside the Conservator Studio, was an invaluable resource, as was her book, Magnetic Mounting Systems for Museums and Cultural Institutions, which I can highly recommend. The system we have developed for the mounting of the majority of the flat objects is very simple. The object is placed on a cardboard support cut a few millimeters larger than the object. We use black museum board from Klug, and small neodymium magnets are attached to the back of the board with fabric tape. The object is held in place with magnets on the recto that have been covered with Japanese tissue and wheat starch paste. This provides a barrier between the magnets and the object, and also allows the magnets to be color matched to the object. Some of the magnets were covered by colleagues at home during the lockdown period. This is a time-consuming process, but the covered magnets will be able to be used over and over again. This method was used for the objects hung on the walls of the cases and for fixing the objects in the drawers so that they do not slide around when the drawers are opened and closed. Once mounted, the objects are stored in boxes, separated by corrugated cardboard with plastisode spaces. This prevents the magnets from jumping off the recto of each object and attaching themselves to the magnets attached to the verso of another support. Most of the hanging objects are letters, documents, or booklets, but for the graphic works that look better when matted, we used a slightly different system. Holes are cut in the backboard and the magnets are attached to the verso of the window mat. They protrude slightly through to the other side and attach to the wall. I quickly discovered that a magnet that is attached to a wall cannot hold as much weight as a magnet attached to a horizontal surface. Heavier objects would therefore be hung from hooks hanging from the ceiling of the cases. Coatings and coverings can also make a difference. If a surface is rough, a magnet will not hold as strongly. I also discovered that when a magnet is attached to a non-metal surface, such as museum board, and that is attached to a metal surface, it does not hold as strongly as when you have metal to magnet to metal, or magnet to magnet to metal. Also, magnets hold more strongly when 2 magnets of the same size are used. The strength cannot be increased by using a larger magnet on one side. As we said, the museum is not yet opened. I hope there will be a chance in the future to report back on how easy these systems are to use. Thank you very much.